All right, well, I think we're all strapped in and we are ready to get started. So let me just say now properly, with everyone tuned in, welcome. This is the first public information session of the Victoria Saanich Citizens Assembly on Amalgamation. And with my colleagues, Chris Ellis and Sarah Yaffe and Richard Johnson, and others who you'll have a chance to meet in the weeks and months ahead, let me just say we are really honored to be able to help steward this process over the next many months, and to kick off this session by sharing with you the plans that have been developed to run a really excellent Citizens Assembly in Victoria and Saanich. My name is Peter McLeod. I am the chair of the Victoria Saanich Citizens Assembly. I'll be explaining a little bit more about my role, but for tonight, it makes me the talking head on the screen. And I'm the person who's going to try and take some time tonight to explain a little bit about what a Citizens Assembly is and how we expect the process to unfold. I'll say more about all of that in the minutes to come. Before we get any further, however, I do want to take a moment just to recognize the territory on which we're meeting. Now, my giveaway is that window just behind me, and you can see it's dark where I am. I'm in the traditional territory of the Mississaugas Anishinaabe, who have for time immemorial gathered at the mouth of the Ganaraska River. Now, if you have any command of Ontario geography, Ganaraska would put you around Port Hope and Cobourg, which is where I make my home and which is where I'm based this evening. I will, of course, be coming out to Victoria and Saanich throughout this process. This will be my fifth Citizens Assembly in British Columbia, and I can't wait to get back to you. More importantly, however, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Citizens Assembly will be operating on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, and specifically the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and the Wixonic peoples, who themselves have a deep connection to the lands and waters in what we now know as Victoria and Saanich, British Columbia. I think it's also important that as we set out on this novel process, that we nevertheless acknowledge that Citizens Assemblies operate within a framework that itself is a product of colonial systems of governance, and that these systems have historically excluded and marginalized the voices of the original inhabitants and stewards of these lands. I think this puts a special onus on us with this assembly to do better, to be committed to listening, to learning, to engaging with Indigenous peoples and their communities in a manner that respects their inherent rights and treaties. And I hope that you'll see throughout this assembly, and by its conclusion, that we will have worked to honor the land, respect all its people, and contribute to the healing of our communities for generations to come. Our agenda tonight is pretty straightforward. We've got a little bit of Citizens Assembly 101. Some of you will be very familiar with the process. For others, it's brand new. We'll talk a little bit about the origins of the Assembly and, critically, our mandate, what we're charged to do and also not do over the course of the next many months. We'll talk about my role and the team that will be supporting the Assembly, as well as a committee of advisors that will be providing some oversight to the process to ensure that there's an extra set of eyes on the process to help ensure its integrity and that it's complete. We're going to talk about the thing that I expect most people are excited for, and that's the membership of the Assembly, and maybe more precisely, exactly how you get to be a member of the Assembly. Well, we're going to explain that process, which we call a civic lottery. We're going to let you know when the Assembly is taking place and also how you can get involved. I'm going to try and move through as much material as I can. As I mentioned before we began and before many of you logged in, you can raise a digital hand by clicking on the participants button along the ribbon of controls on Zoom, or even better, you can just put a message into the chat window. Myself, my colleagues will be keeping an eye on it as we get going. So let's talk about this thing called a Citizens Assembly. The way we understand a Citizens Assembly is to describe it as a long-form deliberative process where a demographically representative group of randomly selected volunteers study an issue in order to make one or more consensus recommendations to government on behalf of a wider community. Now let's just pause and break that down, because we've packed a lot into that statement, and much of it is critical. Most of us are familiar with typical participatory processes that invite us to a town hall meeting or maybe to serve on an advisory committee. Citizens assemblies really are a class apart. They are a mechanism that allows people to take a really close look at a single issue. And while we talk about the citizens piece, we often forget to acknowledge the very significant role that experts of various kinds have in informing the process. So you can think about a citizens assembly that is a citizen expert dialogue. So what do we mean when we say it's long form? Well, it's not like a town hall meeting taking place over a few hours. In fact, the members of the Citizens Assembly will themselves be spending about 64 hours in session time over the course of 8 Saturdays beginning this September. That's pretty long. When we describe it as demographically representative, what we mean is that we'll be striving to create an assembly that looks like what you might expect if you put Victoria and Saanich in a room. Now, of course, we can't get every permutation of resident that lives in the two communities, but as I'll explain later, we'll be looking for some key demographic criteria: sex, age, where people live, in order to create that balanced group. Now, as much as some people might like, we are not accepting applications. And you can't convince us that you are a person of greater merit to serve on the assembly. At the end of the day, from amongst the pool of people who are randomly selected to invite, we will then randomly select the members of the assembly in such a way that satisfies those demographic criteria. And the reason that we're selecting them is so that they can then study the issue of amalgamation in great depth and detail over the course of those 64 plus hours that I mentioned. Ultimately, a citizens assembly has to reach a recommendation, and we strive in an assembly to speak with one voice, which means to produce a consensus recommendation. Now, some of you are familiar with the Citizens Assembly that we ran a number of years ago in Duncan and North Cowichan, and you may have seen the report. You'll know that there's more than one recommendation. There's a very detailed discussion of all of the issues that led them ultimately to recommend amalgamation. You can expect in a Citizens Assembly's report to include not just a simple thumbs up or thumbs down, but a very detailed discussion of the issue, the considerations, and it's a report written largely by the members of the Assembly themselves. My team will be responsible for the appendix, the preamble, some of the details of the process, but the substance of the report is written by the members of the Assembly, and we hope that they'll be able to reach consensus on their position. Lastly, a Citizens Assembly is not just the sum of the parts. The challenge for all members is not only to argue what they think might be in their interest, but really to think about the wider interests of the community as a whole, and not just for today, but for tomorrow. These are some of the features that I believe make citizens' assemblies unique and also allows them to make an important contribution to our democratic culture. You may know that citizens' assemblies, of course, began here in British Columbia. In fact, citizens' assemblies very quietly have become one of Canada's most significant democratic exports over the past 20 years. The first Citizens Assembly took place in 2004. It was province-wide, and it addressed the question of electoral reform. Shortly after, the provincial government in Ontario also emulated that process. But from there, it leapt the pond over to Ireland. And those who have followed the trajectory of citizens' assemblies will know that the Irish experience of assemblies has had a profound impact on their constitutional guarantees that they afford citizens and major policy questions over the past 15 years. In fact, there have been more than 1,000 assemblies that have taken place since 2004, all across the world, predominantly, though, in Europe. It's a movement that people involved in this work often refer to as the deliberative wave, a phenomenon that has been positively studied and reported on by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And here in Canada, what's happened? Well, I mentioned a moment ago that I'll be returning to BC, having led other citizens' assemblies, like those in Grandview Woodland in Vancouver or Duncan, North Cowichan. But in fact, there have been more than 50 citizens' assemblies and reference panels in Canada, making this the 5th in British Columbia. Yes, you'll hear them sometimes go by different names: citizen conventions in France, citizen juries in the United States, sometimes here in Canada, referring to them as reference panels. But the core components, which I described to you a moment ago, remain the same. And how do we boil this all down? Into 3 key parts. First, if you're going to bring people together to spend so much time working on something, it's got to be clear what you're asking them to do. So the mandate of the Assembly, which has been given to us by both councils, Victoria and Saanich, is critical to ground and orient our deliberations. The civic lottery is how we get the members in the room in a way that is fair and representative. And then the real work of the Assembly, that citizen expert dialogue, is all of the learning that goes on, the development of a curriculum, and ultimately the deliberation in small groups and in plenary sessions that yields the recommendations I've described. So let's just pause for a moment and talk a little bit about the Assembly's origins. Perhaps many of you will recall that in 2018, you had the opportunity to answer a community opinion question during the municipal election. This is the tally for the vote that took place in Saanich. In both Saanich and Victoria, a majority of voters endorsed the question that they were in favor of spending $250,000 to establish the Assembly to critically explore the costs, benefits, and disadvantages of amalgamation. Our mandate flows from this community question, and it was subsequently developed by councillors representing both municipalities. They have provided a terms of reference which will guide the Assembly's work. And pulling from that terms of reference is the following text. There you'll see it again. Our job is to explore the costs, benefits, and disadvantages of the amalgamation between Saanich and Victoria. But specifically, we are tasked to first identify common aspirations for local good governance to provide the basis for then evaluating costs, benefits, and disadvantages of amalgamation and status quo relative to their current independent status. Ultimately, there is a measure of subjectivity in the Assembly's work, which is why identifying those common aspirations, common goals, common values around good local governance will provide an important compass for the Assembly as it navigates its way through these issues. Speaking of issues, our second task is to list the issues the Assembly believes need to be resolved for amalgamation to merit consideration. And some of these issues may be related to the implementation and integration of municipalities under amalgamation. After weighing all of this up, in considering what it believes to be in the best interests of both municipalities. The Assembly will then strive to achieve, there's the term again, a consensus recommendation on whether and under what conditions the municipalities should amalgamate. This is our game plan. This is what we will return to throughout the process to make sure that we're on track and to make sure that we're fulfilling our mandate on behalf of local residents. Let me just pause, however, to unpack what would happen if the Assembly was to conclude that amalgamation was beneficial. I want to be very clear that the Assembly's job is advisory. They are not the deciders. They will submit their report to area residents and to both councils, at which point both municipalities have committed to taking up that recommendation, to themselves deliberating on the conclusion, and then to work with the province to initiate a public referendum. It's only if voters in both Saanich and Victoria vote in favor of amalgamation during a referendum that the plan would then advance to the province, which has the final word. So it's important for everyone to understand that the Citizens Assembly is not the decider. There are several stage gates in this process between the recommendation the Assembly will make and if it decides to recommend amalgamation, to that ultimately being approved by the province of British Columbia. We have also been given a set of principles to guide our deliberations. The first is a commitment to openness and transparency. That's part of the reason why a public information session like tonight is taking place, why we've launched a website this past December, and why you can continue to return to the website throughout the process to see videos of many of the presentations that will occur, to receive any of the digital materials, any of the textual materials, supplementary materials that Assembly members are working with. We will strive throughout the process to be very transparent about our operations, because we're working on behalf of all residents. We'll strive to share what we can of the process with as many as are interested. It's also important that we demonstrate our accountability and our legitimacy. This means that we stick to our task, we stick to our budget, we have the benefit of our oversight and advisory group, and we invite the scrutiny of councillors, of residents, of the media to take a close look at our process. Effective representation means bringing together the 48 Assembly members through a rigorous selection process of the kind I'll be describing when we get into the mechanics of the civic lottery, to do what we can to lower any barriers to individuals who wish to serve. This means offering childcare, elder care, providing a stipend on a needs-based as needed basis, and also working to address any other accessibility concerns related to physical or cognitive disability that a volunteer might experience. We will also be working to safeguard the independence and integrity of the process. This is why the councils decided to commission a Citizens Assembly that would be run by a third party like ourselves with extensive experience in the format. I've mentioned as well that we'll be developing a curriculum. There will be many different speakers representing many different perspectives, because it's critical that the members of the Assembly can consider themselves to be well informed about all of the nuances of this issue. But of course, you can't create a curriculum that is tilted to one direction or another. We have to achieve a reasonable balance. Part of my job as the chair will be to lead a facilitation team through a collaborative dialogue and decision-making process. And in this way, foremost in my mind will be to ensure that there is respect amongst all of the members and towards the two communities. So those are the principles that animate the Citizens Assembly. I mentioned a moment ago that the independence is in part a function of the fact that the Secretariat is run by my organization, Mass LBP. We're a democracy organization that works across Canada on citizens' assemblies because we believe that our democratic culture will be stronger if we find ways to bring more people to the table to think about matters of public concern. Our organization, however, is not the only organization that the municipalities could have selected, but following a competitive tendering process, they decided that we were the ones best equipped to deliver the process. We're responsible for all aspects of the assembly, its design, its execution, communications. And while you're getting to know me this evening, I hope in time you'll get a chance to know the three core people who are working with me to make the assembly possible. Richard Johnson, himself in Victoria, our lead facilitator. Chris Ellis up in Edmonton, who is our project manager, and Sarah Yaffe, who will be working closely with me as we develop the curriculum. I've mentioned that we're appointing an Advisory and Oversight Committee. It will be comprised of 6 members, 2 of whom will live in Saanich, 2 of whom will live in Victoria, and 2 of whom won't live in either community. Their job is to bring local perspective, but also expertise in good deliberative processes, expertise in urban affairs and municipal governance, expertise in the realities lived by residents in both communities. Their task is to be impartial, to be above the fray, to be well-respected individuals, and we're looking forward to announcing the members of this committee later in February. Their function will be to review the curriculum, to ensure, as I've said, that it covers off all of the bases that you might expect to know or to understand as a member of the Assembly. But they are also there to serve the members of the Assembly itself. Should any member have a concern that they feel is being ill-addressed by myself or another member of my team, the Oversight Committee acts as a kind of sounding board to try and address that member's concerns. Okay. How will members of the Assembly be selected? Well, come April the 3rd, 10,000 brown envelopes are going to find their way into the mail system in the communities of Victoria and Saanich. I want to be clear. We do not know which homes received those letters. In our partnership with Canada Post, they will randomly select the homes in such a way that ensures broad geographic distribution throughout those communities. Only if you receive a letter are you eligible to volunteer. And one of the controls we have on the letter is that each contains a unique code that allows the recipient to register their name online, by phone, or by return post. Now, you might be sitting there next to your spouse or loved one and saying, well, what happens? What if we get a letter and we both want to volunteer? Well, my friends, you get to fight that one out. We can only allow one respondent per household over the age of 18. If you do receive a letter, however, we want to encourage you to strongly consider volunteering. Or if you have a younger member of your household, but who's still over the age of 18, maybe to push the envelope in their direction too, to consider volunteering. On May the 22nd, the 48 members of the Citizens Assembly will be randomly selected from those who have received a letter and chose to volunteer. The process is called a civic lottery. And let me assure you that one of the happiest days at our organization is when we start placing those phone calls to the 48 lucky individuals and giving them our congratulations on being selected. It will take us a few days to reach everyone to confirm their eligibility. And then we begin an extensive onboarding process that will continue through the spring and summer so that we are ready for our first meeting on September the 21st. I mentioned before that the civic lottery is stratified, and that ensures that we have a good demographic balance. Owing to the disparity in population between Victoria and Saanich, there will be 27 seats on the Assembly reserved for residents of Saanich and 21 seats reserved for residents of Victoria. We will also weight different factors like gender, age, geography, housing status, and we'll also be ensuring that there is broad diversity as well as the participation of Indigenous residents. All of these factors are weighed automatically by computer. There are no human hands or eyes involved in it, but a rather sophisticated sortition algorithm produces a panel of 48 members, and those are the ones who we begin by calling. Where there's an instance where a volunteer is not able to serve, we then go back into our pool of candidates and again blindly select another candidate who matches their demographic criteria. I mentioned a moment ago that the Assembly is going to meet for the first time on Saturday, September the 21st. That will be the first of 8 meetings that will take place, roughly on a cadence of 1 per month, with the final meeting of the Assembly concluding April the 5th, 2025. We will also be scheduling 4 public roundtable meetings where any resident of Victoria or Saanich can come, express their perspectives, and talk with members of the Assembly. There will be 2 meetings in Saanich and 2 meetings in Victoria, and they will take place at different junctures in the Assembly process. Before we reach the holidays next year, we will also be releasing an interim report concerning the Assembly's work. You can expect another public information session, I expect, around that time, as well as the technical report, which is currently being commissioned from a firm with expertise in issues related to urban governance and amalgamation. So I am just about concluding here in my overview of all things Assembly. Just a couple of things to remember. 1, we don't choose who gets a letter. That is entirely in the hands of our friends at Canada Post. When we talk about a curriculum, we can expect more than 25 different presenters on panels as keynote speakers, various kinds of formats. We'll be inviting these presenters to speak to the Assembly based on the curriculum that we develop with the assistance of our Oversight Committee. And all of these presentations are going to be posted online. The members of the Assembly, I've talked already about the 64 hours of in-session time. Cumulatively, this is 3,500 session hours that volunteers in Saanich and Victoria will be contributing to this. And while I mentioned a moment ago when the technical report will be delivered, that technical report will do a lot to provide the data, the evidence around the state of services in both municipalities, how their governance systems function, and think about the costs and benefits, the disadvantages of amalgamation and the status quo, by considering some of the impacts related to integrating different municipal functions and services like engineering, public safety, finance, and human resources. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's give you a flavor of what you can expect the independent firm to examine. I might have just seen someone take a picture of this slide, and absolutely go for it, but it's a good prompt to remind me to say that these slides are going to be posted as a PDF tomorrow as well. So you'll have access to everything you've seen tonight, including to a video of me yammering on about it all. Just a couple of things to conclude on before we open up for questions. First, how can you get involved? Well, let me say thank you, because you're doing the right thing by being here tonight. And we hope that between now and our next public information session, the numbers of people attending these meetings will only grow. If you do receive one of these brown envelopes in April, please volunteer. We hope that you receive one. We hope that we have a very high response rate from the community. That only happens if people decide to put up their hand, throw their hat in the ring. If you're not selected for the assembly, then certainly consider attending the public roundtable meetings. We'll be letting you know when and where they're taking place months in advance. Don't worry about that now. And we'll be trying to provide other opportunities for people to get information throughout the process. We'll also be receiving written submissions beginning in the autumn. We'll spell out a very clear process for how you can make a submission, how it will be considered by the Assembly, and also that it will be publicly posted to the Victoria Saanich Assembly website. And you can follow along at home, as they say, by reviewing materials and presentations made to the Assembly. And so that's where the slide decks, the handouts, as well as videos of presentations will be made available to you in a timely way.